Hi, Dan here, Scootering Magazine. Welcome back to part 2 of the jetting videos that I'm doing. I think by the time this is finished, I'll have ended up doing probably, I'm guessing, 3 videos on this. The first one, hopefully you've seen. If you haven't, please go back and review it, because they will make more sense if you watch all 3. In fact, it's almost essential that you watch all 3. I just didn't want to do one long video because it just becomes too much to digest. But the first video I did really because if you've ever tried to jet a scooter and you don't actually have the knowledge of what you're doing, or if you've ever bought a brand new Dellorto Carb and got it straight out of the box, you would have no idea that the jetting which is in a brand new Dellorto Carb straight out of the box is so far removed from anything which is useful to a Vespa or Lambretta scooter. Specifically, I'm talking about the PHBH range there. Then it's going to be a nightmare for you to set up. If you're an engine builder or a tuner or a dyno owner or whatever, and you know all about this stuff, these videos might seem, a bit painful for you. There's probably nothing useful in them for you. This is more for the masses out there who are just struggling to get their scooters set up to a ballpark starting point where they can then go out and do the plug chops and start to really sort of get things tightened up. But I did the first video, got a great response to it already after only a few days, which I was quite sort of overwhelmed by. I've had nearly all positive comments, and I wouldn't say I've had any negative comments, maybe just 1 or 2 which were questioning why I didn't mention other things. And the answer to that is that I just couldn't squeeze it all into one video. It would be too much. So there's going to be video 2 and then video 3. Video 2, this one I'm going to run through fuel tap issues, float valves, ignition, air filters, the difference between piston port and revalve jetting, some of the flaws as I see them of other carbs, and then in the third video I'm going to get out my dyno files and just reel off some specific jetting examples of actual known settings that I've worked with that have become very common on certain setups which are quite popular. It might be a Vespa Molossi 210 with a PM pipe and an open mouth carb, or a Polini Tori or a Lambretta GP 200, whatever. I've got just stacks of them, but I will list them on video 3 in the comments section, so you will know which scooters I'm outlining, and I'll try to give you a time slot as to what each one is, so then you can just, if you don't want to watch the whole thing, you can just flick straight forward to the specific jetting that you require. So in this topic, one of the things I must say is I've got quite a nice comment off, funny comment off some guy. He was suggesting that my videos weren't good enough because there was no Booby Ladies to assist me in the videos. I would like a Booby Lady to assist me in the video, so if you have any suggestions of where I might find one, please do let me know. Or if you're watching a video of a scooter channel who's got Booby Ladies assisting them in the video, please leave me a link, because I'd like to see that also. But sorry, there's no Booby Ladies in my videos yet. So to get into this one then, the first thing I want to discuss is the fuel tap. Yeah, look, if you've got fuel flow issues, all the jetting, situations in the world are not going to solve that drama. So you need to be unscrewing your fuel tap, checking they get full of sediment, the filters on them very, very quickly. You want to make sure that is clean. You want to make sure your tank is clean. Get your tap back in and then do a fuel flow check on it. And you attach a pipe to the tap. Put the pipe into a milk bottle or some other receptacle, and you want to hold that receptacle at the same height as your carburettor. That's very important. And then you will turn the tap on and you will measure the flow over 1 minute. And you want to be looking for something in the region of 1 pint per minute. If it's a little bit less than that, it's not that big of a deal. But if it's a lot less than that, that is a big deal, and you need to then be addressing that situation before you move on. I ran through some base settings which are very, very popular for a tremendous amount of Vespa and Lambretta scooters as a starting point for you to then jet from and do your plug chops and fine tuning for yourselves. They were a 55 pilot, an AV266 atomizer, X13 needle on the second clip, a 40 slide, and then the main jet relevant to your piston port, reed valve, open mouth, filtered, Clubman expansion chamber kit. But I'm going to come back to that in the next video and give you those brackets of how all those different categories fall, and you'll see that there's a pattern, and then I'll give you some specific examples within those brackets. So I'll come back to that one. So your fuel tap, pint per minute, your base settings for your carb to work from your plug chops, and then your float valve. Within the carburettor, you have your floats. They act like a stopcock, ballpark system, making sure that the float bowl at the bottom is always full of fuel to draw from. And traditionally, the PHBH comes out of the box from Dellorto with a 200 in. I don't know why, it's rubbish. It just doesn't flow enough for any tuned kits, and you will get fuel starvation issues. It might not even show up on a dyno, but when you are chugging down the motorway full throttle and it is commanding a lot of fuel and it is guzzling it up out of that bowl, it will eventually run dry, and you'll get some problems with that. So you want to be running a 300, they call it the needle valve, the tap jet, the float valve jet, and it's the jet which controls your floats, and it's a 300 is what you want to be fitting. The next thing on the list is ignition timings. At the moment, you know, we're on unleaded fuel with amounts of ethanol in and all other sorts of, you know, problems. So back in the days when we could run 4-star leaded fuel with, you know, 21, 23 degrees of ignition advance, they're long gone. And I would set up nearly all of the scooters that I worked on, say from a few Vespas which had different requirements, but most Lambrettas would be set up on 17 degrees static. But if you start to run one of the ignition advanced retard boxes, and a lot of these would give you an early on curve where you could put the ignition timing up to something like whatever, you know, 26 degrees early on, and then it would come back to static 17 once you got further up the rev range and onto the pipe, and the pipe might not come on power till, so on a France breed race pipe till 5,250 RPM till it comes on pipe. So if you've got a lot of advance, you know, on your ignition and it's running 26 degrees early on in the rev range, if you're tooling around town at 21 or 24 degrees ignition at low revs, you're not getting enough fuel through the system because you're not on the main jet yet, so you're not putting enough coolant through the system, and you've got a lot of heat build up in the cylinder, and you might not feel it until you get out of town, and then when you go to gas it, there's too much heat in the cylinder, you put all the power in, the temperature rockets, and it pops. So what you can do is you can fuel the curve, and when you give it that extra ignition timing up to from 17 to say 23, 24, 25, 26 degrees early on, you must fuel that. So you, like for example, a great example is a McCuney. I was having this discussion with somebody else today, and I thought that they came with a 17.5 tick over pilot jet in them, but he said it was 20, and I won't beg to differ with him, but it's too small. Now you can get by on a 20 or even a 22.5 I used to put in them on the static timing, but once you put in some ignition degrees in there and put it up to say 24 or 26, you can bump that up to a 25, and in some cases I bumped them up to 27.5. Now bearing in mind that some of them were coming in 17.5 pilots or 20s, to go up to a 25 or a 27.5, it's a big jump. You take the ignition curve out of that, it'll choke it to death and it won't handle it. So fuel the curve, and the engine will thank you for it. It will give you more power early on in the rev range, which is great. That's the whole point of the ignition system. And it will keep cooler, which we will all be grateful for, so you don't pop a piston. So that's how advanced. That's a little summary of how the ignition advanced retard boxes need managing, but you do need to fuel the curve. So bigger pilots, if you have got one of those advanced retard boxes on, unless you want to, you know, hold a piston. Air filters. I always built engines open mouth. I hate air filters. I just felt that they brought too many For the problem they solved, which was everybody was frightened to death that they were going to get a stone through the carburettor or some grit or sand or whatever, for that one problem solved, the other problems that came with air filters I just felt weren't worth the hassle. A great solution to this is you can actually fit the pipe from, if you've ever seen the ram air filters that have the 90-degree elbow that comes up, you can fit the pipe and leave it completely open mouth at the top. So you don't have that open carb, and you can pierce the hole in the bottom to make sure the fuel drains off and everything, but you're limiting the amount of problems that you're going to get for stuff flying into the carb, but you're not getting the suppressed behaviour of a foam or other filter fitted to the system, because you would have guys coming in with a filter, this is for a dyno, guys would come in with a filter all oiled up and gunked up, you would dyno it up at that setting, and you would have to lean it right off because it wasn't getting the airflow through. They'd go away, they'd clean the filter out or put a new filter on, now it's got more airflow and you've got the potential to seize there. Or vice versa, they would come in with a brand new clean filter and you would jet it perfectly for that, and then they would allow it to get all sodden and gummed up and dusty. It would come bogging down, and they were like ringing up saying, hey, my scooter's now bogging down, it's rich, and you put it on the dyno, it's a problem. And I'd be like, right, bring it in, let's take the air filter off, it's causing too many problems, let's get the clean air flowing through. If you're worried, and I never saw anybody ever have a problem with stuff flying in the carb. That's not to say it doesn't happen. I heard lots of stories of it happening, but it didn't happen to any of my customers, and it certainly never happened to me. But if you're worried about that, you can still, most people running with panels on who haven't got a hole in the carb, they're not going to suffer with that issue anyway. If you're really, really like paranoid and worried about it, just fit the U-bend on, but without the filter on the top. But if you do fit the filter, you're going to richen it up, and so any of the jetting settings that I've given you, you can perhaps just scale down a little bit, but you'll see that from your plug chops. In terms of also piston port versus reed valve, down the bottom end in the jetting area, you'll see a lot of similarities in the jetting that you get down the bottom end for both of those. But once you start to open it up through the mid-range and the top end, the command of the fuel from the engine on a reed valve engine is immense, and once the pipe starts to draw the fuel through the carburettor, you really need those bigger jets in. And so that's why you'll see somebody on a Lambretta which is piston port, and he's running a 122 main jet with a Clubman and an air filter. This guy has got the same kit, but he's had a reed valve conversion done on it, and he's running open mouth, and he's now running a 150 main jet. That's the sort of difference that you can see between the two. So I'm going to run through those differences in a bit more detail when I do the main jetting on part 3, when I give you some examples of specific jetting on specific scooters, and you'll see how the patterns work out on piston port versus reed valve. It's the same on whether it's the piston port Lambretta or the rotary inlet of a Vespa. They've got a fixed inlet timing, so you only need a fixed amount of fuel for a fixed period. If you reed valve the Vespa, or you reed valve the Lambretta, say for a TS1 or a Molossi with a reed valve kit and a reed valve crank, you will see a big command of fuel, and you will see the jump in the jetting examples that I give you in video 3. The other thing I just want to mention is that I didn't want anybody to think that I was like totally against all of the carbs. My whole reasoning for the first PHBH video was that it is a great all-round carb. It is easy to set up, very available, very cheap. But some of the other carbs do have problems. A 35mm TMX Mikuni is a very, very popular carb, and I got a lot of great results out of those on the dyno. But on a large amount, not all, but a large amount, and depending which pipe, I saw it more, say, on something like a front speed tourer than I would on a front speed race. But anybody who was they made a classic mistake of saying, I want a touring setup. They came with a touring pipe and a touring tune to the cylinder, and then they got a 35mm Mikuni. It was the wrong carb for that tune. But you try to work with what people bring you, and you explain to them that this isn't going to necessarily be the best choice, but I can see you've got 170 quid worth of carb here, I'll try and do something with it. They have a fixed atomizer. That's going to be your mid-range in a fixed position. You're trying to work on only the needle, which are in variants, and needle clip settings on those variants. Whereas on a Dellorto, you have the needle, the clip setting, and the atomizer to work with. Atomizer neck length and atomizer bore. So you've got nearly 4 settings to work with on a Dellorto carb for the mid-range. Whereas with the Mikuni 35mm TMX, you've got 2. You've got the needle and the clip. You could get into, oh yeah, I'm going to file the needle down, I'm going to go half clip settings, I'm going to do it. It's a ball ache. And so you would predominantly get a point where you've got the mid-range and top end perfect, but the bottom end was too lean. And you couldn't have that. So then you would richen up the bottom end, and it would, so that was spot on, but then the top end was now too rich. And you were scaling back on the main jet, and you were fighting this problem. It wasn't insurmountable, you could get around it, but they just became harder work. And at the end of the day, when you would look at it and say, well, hang on, if I'm going for this size of carb, I've got the 34mm, VSHB carb, and let alone the fact that if you want to look at a touring setup, something like a 30mm Dellorto would have been a better choice in the first place anyway, or even a 27mm TMX. The VHSA oval bore, a lot of people could choose those. They came from, they have a strong following in the go-karting arena. And people are going for these obscure things like Electron carbs and the VHSA flat slide. The VHSA flat slide, it has a 30mm width, but the height of the bore is almost the same as the 34mm Dellorto. So when you're on full main jet, you're supping nearly as much juice as a 34mm Dellorto, but you're not getting the benefits of the performance. So you're not getting the economy of a 30mm round slide, you're not getting the performance of a 34mm flat slide. So why people turned up with the 30mm VHSA, I don't know. But, horses for courses. The 34mm would bring some performance gains, the 34mm VHSB, but you would get mile per gallon issues. And if you're on an RB250 with a big fat pipe or with a big drawer on it, and you fit a VHSB 34mm on it, and you've got a standard tank on, who's the guy stopping for fuel every 5 minutes and everybody else getting miffed off because he's just lurching towards the next petrol station? And it's the old tortoise and the hare situation on the way to the rally then. There's a lot of old school stuff going on with the big carbs, but there's some really, really sweet setups now with smaller carbs. And I know I keep harping on about it, but when you look at the power that some tuners, Darryl Taylor, getting out of 225, 230cc cylinders, 30 plus mid-range horsepower, with a nice touring setup and good miles per gallon out of a 27mm carb, you've got to start at some point just saying to yourself, why am I fitting a 35mm? Why am I fitting a 39mm? And what's my fascination with this, particular go-karting carb or this GP race carb or whatever. But it's horses for courses, and everybody will do what they see fit. But there are applications where I do like those carbs, and again, maybe I'll do another video on that because this one's been going on nearly 20 minutes already. So the fuel tap, pint per minute, float valve 300, ignition, fuel the advanced retard curve, air filters, they will richen up your jetting, so take that into consideration. If you jet it with the filter on, don't then remove the filter. You'll lean it up and you'll nip it up. Jet it with the filter and keep it on, or jet it without the filter and keep it off, but don't try and mix the two. Piston port commands less fuel, reed valve commands more. Somebody suggested in one of the comments that the whole problem that people were having and why they were needing to run AV atomizers instead of AS was that they needed fuel pumps. I know people who fit fuel pumps to scooters. They're not the largest majority of scooter owners. The majority of rally going scooter owners in the UK do not fit fuel pumps to their scooters. When you do, most people who came into my garage who'd got a fuel pump fitted, aside from the race community who did it for different reasons, but on the road, the reason they did it was because they'd had endless trouble trying to set a carburettor up on a particular application. They'd run out of options and they thought, I'll put a fuel pump on it, that'll solve the problems. The fuel pump puts an additional amount of pressure through the system, and therefore you're effectively forcing the fuel through the jets rather than relying on the natural vacuum of the engine. And yeah, that is going to richen things up. That doesn't make choosing a leaner jetting arrangement then you know, the right thing to do. The right thing to do is not need the fuel pump in the first place, because you've got the whole system set up correctly, which is why I recommend the AV atomizer range in the Dellorto PHBH. So fuel pumps, and then I've been through the other carb floors. I've been through the jetting examples of the 55 Pilot AV266 X13, second clip 40 slide, main jet to suit, go as rich as you can, scale back. That's all for this video. I hope that's rounded off some of the questions that were raised from the first video, filled in a few of the gaps, and the third video, I hope, will complete. I've had some great feedback, a lot of good questions. Keep them coming, pop them in the comments. You've all got different ways of viewing this, and I don't see anybody as being right or wrong. You know, it's just the sharing of knowledge, and I think, you know, that works well. So that's all for now. See you on the next video.